chapter 20, looking at verses 11 through 15. Well, our Activate Summit is coming up this summer. The dates are going to be July 16th through the 18th. I just went ahead and registered earlier this morning. And so the process is there. The registration form is up. And we have a kids program, a kids track. This is for ages 6 to 12 during our Activate Summit this summer. Once again, the dates are July 16th through the 18th. Here in Tupelo, Mississippi, you can go to afa.net/events, and you'll see that Activate Summit link. Dr. Jessica Peck's going to be there. Katie Faust is going to be speaking. Brother Bert Harper will be there. Pastor Jeff Shreve and others will all be at the Activate Summit this summer. Our theme is Roots to Fruit, grounded in truth, growing in grace. So we look forward to seeing you there. Also in the fall, October 29th and 30th, we're going to be back at the Ark Encounter and the Creation Museum. So we'd love to see you this October in the Cincinnati, Ohio area, October 29th and 30th. That's our AFA at the Ark, where we also go to the Creation Museum as well. All of these events are over at afa.net/events. You can check out that link. Well, let's talk about what's going on in the news this week. Many of you heard my commentary Monday on what's going on in Iran and the Middle East. President Trump is going to give a speech tonight from the Oval Office, prime time. It's going to roughly last about 20 minutes, according to the networks, the major networks who are airing it. And he's supposed to provide an update on the conflict with Iran. So we'll see where that goes. I'll be tuning into it this evening at 9 p.m. Eastern, 8 p.m. Central. And we just need to continue to pray that the Lord would give President Trump wisdom. That he would give him wisdom and discernment, and that he would protect our forces in the region, and that there would be some type of successful and swift conclusion to what is going on in the region. Another thing that is taking place today and took place this morning is oral arguments at the Supreme Court regarding birthright citizenship. And just to refresh our memory here, this case has to do with an executive order President Trump signed and the 14th Amendment, which has been interpreted in the past by the High Court. The 14th Amendment, which was originally intended to give the children, give slaves, and then, of course, the children of slaves, U.S. citizenship after slavery was beginning to be outlawed. And so this was meant to remedy, the fact that we have slaves that were brought over to America. They themselves and, of course, their children are now in America. What do you do with them? Do they have to be deported? All of that. This is the post-slavery time period as we were beginning to phase out slavery. And so that's the context of the 14th Amendment. But it's been applied by the courts and interpreted by the courts since then to apply to anyone and everyone. And instead of this narrowly focused issue of slavery and what to do with the children of slaves, this was being applied to anyone and everyone who comes into the country illegally. All right, so that's where we are today. This is being challenged by President Trump and his administration at the High Court. I want to play a couple of clips here as far as the ramifications of this and the logical conclusion of the continued, in my opinion, misapplication of birthright citizenship in the 14th Amendment. Let's play clip one. This is Samuel Alito arguing just the insanity of birthright citizenship. Clip one.
Not subject to any foreign power is pretty straightforward. So let me give you these examples. A boy is born here to an Iranian father who has entered the country illegally. That boy is automatically an Iranian national at birth, and he has a duty to provide military service to the Iranian government. Is he not subject to any foreign power?
Not within the meaning of the 1866 Act, Justice Alito. And that's clear from Wong Kim Ark, and it's clear from the debates. What the framers meant by the phrase "not subject to any foreign power" was referring to the ambassador exception. If it meant what the government contends, basically not a subject of any foreign power, that another country considers you a jus sanguinis citizen, then lawful permanent residents, all foreign nationals.
Well, ordinary public meaning of that would certainly encompass that boy, would it not?
Justice Alito, if you think that the language of the 1866 Act was ambiguous, as Wong Kim Ark says, the shift to the language of the 14th Amendment, which is the operative text, certainly clears up any ambiguity.
Well, what I said about a boy born to an Iranian father is true of children born here to parents who are nationals of other countries. If I'm correct, it's true to a child who's born here to Russian parents. It's true to a child who's born here to Mexican parents. They're automatically citizens or nationals of those countries and have a duty of military service. It sure seems like that makes them subject to a foreign power.
So the point here, not to get too in the weeds and into the legalese of this, what Samuel Alito, Justice Alito, is alluding to there is if you apply it the way we've been applying it, which in my opinion, once again, is wrong, you're granting citizenship to foreign combatants, eventual foreign combatants, because you have an Iranian, and this is just a modern example because of the conflict with Iran, but you can apply this to any hostile power, Russian, Chinese, North Korean, for example. You have a Chinese, and this is actually happening, this is not just a hypothetical, you have a Chinese national comes into the country illegally, has a child, boom, that child is a U.S. citizen, and if it's a male, eventually they'll be military age. And so they have an original allegiance to their country of origin, their nation of origin, of which they are a citizen of. So you got dual citizenship, boom, right off the bat. Literally, out of the womb, you've got dual citizenship. U.S. citizenship, this is according to the current interpretation. And of course, the child's also a Chinese national because of the parents. So you see the problem here, all right? And then the mass abuse of this is illegal immigrants. I mean, this is the majority of these cases that we're talking about are simply illegal immigrants coming into the country, having what they're calling anchor babies. And then not only does the child get immediate citizenship, but then the parents get eventual citizenship. Once the child turns 21, there's a legal process where you can go about requesting that your parents receive naturalization or some form of legalization. All right? So this is very problematic, has been very problematic. This is why we have hundreds of thousands, probably maybe millions, of children who are U.S. citizens that neither of their parents are from here. Neither of their parents are from the U.S., but yet they are U.S. citizens. That's because of this misapplication of the 14th Amendment. So that's what the litigation is about. It would be rather extraordinary if the Supreme Court were to override this, were to reverse the previous understanding of the 14th Amendment and get rid of birthright citizenship, which is what they call it. That would be a big deal. Very, very positive victory at the Supreme Court. I'm not sure they've got the courage to do it. There was a couple other arguments I want to play here when we got a minute or two left. This is going to be clip 2. This is John Sauer, the Solicitor General, arguing that we have 8 billion people in the world and they're one plane ride away from having their children full U.S. citizens. Clip 2.
We're in a new world now, as Justice Alito pointed out, to where 8 billion people are one plane ride away from having a child who's a U.S. citizen.
Well, it's a new world. It's the same Constitution.
It is, and as Justice Scalia said, I think in the case that Justice Alito was referring to, you've got a constitutional provision that addresses certain evils, and it should be extended to reasonably comparable evils. He said that about statutory interpretation. I think the same principle applies here.
So that's the Solicitor General and Justice, that would have been Roberts, going back and forth on, well, it's the same Constitution, modern world. But the point that the Solicitor General is making there is that according to this current interpretation, you've got women who could get a flight to the mainland, to the U.S., any territory, any U.S. territory. And as soon as they land, if they have a child at any point once they've hit the ground, even if don't even have a legal reason to be here, because what we have to understand is we don't know people are here illegal until after they're here, obviously, because even through the legal customs process, you don't go through customs, anyone who's flown international, you don't go through customs until after you're on U.S. soil. Well, that's too late. We're not screening them before they get on the plane. No, we're screening them after they land, for better or worse. And so you have a Chinese national, female, obviously pregnant lady that lands on American soil, has no legal right to be here, doesn't have a visa, doesn't have a work permit, nothing, nada. But she has a child once she lands on U.S. soil, boom, U.S. citizens. And then the parents, eventually, boom, U.S. citizens, just like that. So you see the problem. Obviously, this is why it's being litigated. But something's going to have to happen here. This has been a long time problem and a long time coming. And I'm thankful that President Trump and his Department of Justice have the wherewithal to challenge this. We'll be back in a few.
So the chief priest made plans to put Lazarus to death as well. My name is Abraham Hamilton III, and this is the Hamilton Minute. After Jesus resurrected Lazarus, his and Lazarus' fame spread. They already planned to kill Jesus, but now, because Lazarus was tangible evidence of Jesus' resurrection power, the chief priests and Pharisees plotted to kill Lazarus too. They never worried about Lazarus before, but now, because he is a walking billboard of Christ's power, they want him dead too. This, brothers and sisters, is why many come against you. It isn't personal, but satanic forces can't stand your representation of God's power to transform lives. That's why we rejoice when we're slandered for his name's sake. Christ's power is on display.
Listen each weekday from 5 to 6 p.m. Central for the Hamilton Corner with Abraham Hamilton III, Public Policy Analyst for the American Family Association.
Okay, here's an assignment for you, if you will. I want you to take some time and think about a getaway that gives you a chance to get together with other people of faith, deepen your walk with God, and make new friends, all while enjoying the Creation Museum and the Ark Encounter in Kentucky. I'm talking about joining AFA at the Ark, October 29th and 30th. This is a great opportunity to break away from the grind of everyday life and draw closer to God through special presentations from Patricia Engler and Brian Osborne of Answers in Genesis. It also includes entrance to the Creation Museum on Thursday and the Ark Encounter on Friday. Friday's dinner includes a panel discussion with Tony Vitagliano, Walker Wildmon, and Wesley Wildmon, Vice Presidents of American Family Association. This is an event that can fill up quickly, so hurry to afa.net/events to register for AFA at the Ark 2026. afa.net/events, and we'll see you at the Ark.
This is Abraham Hamilton III with AFR, and we're sending Bibles. Here's Michael with Bible League International.
Abraham, here's a very important update on the effort between AFR and Bible League to bless 4,000 waiting believers this Easter all around the world who have been denied God's Word, and that includes a senior saint in Tanzania.
The area where she was at, she had never seen a printed Bible study or even a Bible until she was in retirement age and received her very first Bible as a result of the generosity of donors. What an incredible gift to her, to that village.
Bibleless believers all over the world are yearning to read the precious resurrection story. Listen, if you love your Bible, if God has used His Word to grow you, give that privilege to others. This Easter, AFR and Bible League want to bless 4,000 waiting believers. You've done it for 1,000, 3,000 to go. So at $5 a Bible, $100 since 20. Will you call 800-YES-WORD? 800-YES-WORD. That's 800-YES-WORD. Or give it sendbiblesnow.org. That's sendbiblesnow.org.
At the Core podcasts are available at afr.net. Now, back to At the Core on American Family Radio.
Welcome back to The Core here on American Family Radio. Glad to have you back with us. This just out, in the last 15 minutes. According to multiple news sources, the Iranian officials say that their president, Kazakhstan is his name, will be releasing an important letter to the American people in a few hours. This is set to be released just hours before President Trump's 9 p.m. Eastern address to the nation. So who knows what's going to be in the letter? Maybe it will be something positive, something that will move the ball down the field. But that's what the American people are looking for. We're looking for some way to call this a victory and not continue to escalate here. So we'll continue to track that and see where that goes. I want to jump to our next guest, our first guest for today's program, and that is Elijah Stacy. Elijah's with us. He's founder of Destroy Dushin. He's also the leader behind the Right to Try movement and legislation that we've been covering for the last few years here on the program. Elijah, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, Elijah, tell us a little bit of your story. Obviously, there's a lot here that you could tell, but give us a little background about your story and then why you've been pushing for this innovation when it comes to potentially life-saving treatments for terminal illnesses.
Yeah, so when I was 6 years old, I was diagnosed with a terrible disease, a muscle wasting disease known as Duchenne muscular dystrophy. And by the time I was 11 years old, I was completely dependent on a wheelchair as I lost so much muscle that I could no longer bear any weight on my legs. And then later in my teenage years, lost the ability to use basically my upper limb function. And this is kind of a common progress of the disease. And, as I'm older now, common fear is death, right? Most patients pass away when they're 25 years old. And it's getting better, but this disease is also it's fatal. So that's basically, what's going on with having DMD. And so when it comes to laws like Right to Try, we want to move that forward so that patients have options, right? Because if you're facing death, you want to have the ability to try something rather than have no options available to you.
Well, that's what I want to make sure our audience understands here, what we're talking about. And because if you haven't been through this, either yourself or with a family member or a loved one, a lot of people don't really know about this space. But what we're talking about here is illnesses that are otherwise terminal, right? The doctors claim that they're terminal, whether they are or not, only time tells, as the case with your instance. But nonetheless, when you're in these desperate, obviously life-altering situations, medically, you would think that you could try anything and everything, right? If on one side of the equation is a terminal illness and ultimately physical death, or trying some potentially life-saving, innovative treatments, you would think that everybody would be okay with you trying whatever you want to try that you think might actually help your condition or extend your life. So talk about what these families and patients go through when it comes to the legal red tape to trying some of these treatments.
Yeah, so I mean that's really what the issue is there's just so much red tape, so much fear legally, right? Companies fear getting sued or the FDA looking at them. And then, that's why they don't want to, do things like expanded access, right? Known as compassionate use. Sometimes they do, right? But same thing with, like doctors and whatever, but when you have the right to try, what you're doing is you're creating that legal pathway. You're making it legally possible for patients to then have the ability to try an experimental treatment, right? And a lot of the times too, which I think is important to note, is if you understand drug development, it takes time, like 5, 10 years, sometimes to even reach the clinic, sometimes 20. And, or to get to market even, right? So it takes even longer to get to market. So sometimes, you won't qualify to be in a clinical trial, or you don't want to wait until all these, studies are done to be in a clinical trial. That's why the Right to Try is great, because I'm under the belief that if we have knowledge on something that could potentially help, it shouldn't be the case that, well, you're just born a little too late, right? And literally this could be a month difference sometimes in these diseases. So that's why, the right to try, let's call it 2.0, or the right to try for individualized treatments is important because it goes even further and creates more of a legal pathway for manufacturers and patients. By the way, this can just be, academics, right? It doesn't even necessarily have to be a company. It could be a custom-made therapy that will work perhaps just for your unique DNA, right? And so that's what we need today, especially, and we can maybe get into this if you want, with AI and the way we're going with just so much innovation, so much happening so fast. Let the people, we the patients, let us benefit from it, right? So, yeah.
Yeah, that's what's frustrating here. Once again, we're talking to Elijah Stacy about this right to try legislation, and in this instance, right to try 2.0, a second version, more enhanced version of the legislation that we're working on. But what's frustrating, Elijah, obviously there's multiple things, but you've got some of these very lucrative treatments or medicals or prophylaxis, such as the COVID shots. They were approved like overnight, not literally, but they were approved in weeks, literally, with zero like true safety, controlled safety trials, with A and B blind testing, etc. But here we have some of these other treatments that you're alluding to that have actually been studied for years and years and years. So it's not like this is novel stuff here, but still don't have that final sign off. That's what's frustrating. Tell us about your case, about what you went through, and how there was some treatments that could help treat your specific illness.
Yeah, I mean, look, there's things right now that are promising, but because of the way the way the system is built, I can't access it. And honestly, in some sense, I don't necessarily blame companies all the time because, you're a business at the end of the day. And if you're going to get, treated unfairly, in my opinion, by the FDA, if something goes wrong, well, what are you supposed to do, right? So they have no choice. But if you have a way to go outside the FDA right to try, that would fix a lot of the problem here. So it's very frustrating because I'm just waiting. I have been able to access nothing, and I just see myself getting worse and worse and worse when it's not necessarily a scientific problem, but a regulatory problem. And that's really why I'm talking to you today. Is that because that's what pisses me off the most, right? It's not that a lack of knowledge, but a lack of access.
Tell us why Right to Try 2.0 is different than Right to Try. Explain that to our audience.
Yeah, the difference is you go further, right? So with the Right to Try 1.0, if you will, what you need is a phase 1 safety study completed, right? And then you're able to access it outside the trials. Where with the 2.0, right, that is not needed, right? So you can go straight into it. And that saves a lot of time because again, getting to a phase 1 and completing a phase 1, these safety studies, they do take time, right? Doing all the preclinical, that takes even more time, right? So you put that all together, you're talking potentially, a couple of years, if not more, likely more, to be honest. And so when you cut that out and you're able to just go straight to a patient, who again, you got to understand, these patients are on their deathbed. They want to try something, right? Even if it doesn't work, you want to try, So when you're able to then create that ability, that's why it goes further, if that makes sense.
Where are you trying to pass this legislation currently, or is this a multi-state approach?
So we have been working on the state level. I believe we're up to 17 states now that have passed this. But I'd like to see it go federal. I think that it's going even further than the initial, as we just talked about. And I think that it makes sense to me. This is bipartisanship legislation, right? There's no red disease, there's no blue disease, there's just human disease. And so I think that everybody should get on board. And I get, to be quite honest with you, that's not the case as of right now. And that's very frustrating because this is, something that everybody would benefit from.
Has the Trump administration, and I know there's multiple agencies like sub-agencies under HHS, but you've got RFK Jr. heading up HHS. Where, if any, has the Trump administration weighed in on this? I mean, have they really taken a firm position on this, or is this something that just hasn't been a priority for them?
So I know the Trump administration and Trump himself is a huge fan of right to try. You know, he always talks about it. When he was nominated, you know, at the RNC, he even talked about it. He gave a huge portion of his speech talking about the right to try. And it just makes sense, right? Because it's something that benefits everybody. But I know that Senator Johnson, for example, he was recently testifying. He was talking and he was mentioning that we probably do need a, you know, right to try 2.0. So, you know, I believe there is interest. I believe this is something that, you know, the Trump administration would love to get behind because this is about, you know, making America healthy again. This is exactly the kind of agenda that they laid forth for the American people. And, you know, I just think that we need to get everybody involved to be able to get it to the president's desk.
Yeah. Elijah Stacey, thanks so much for coming on. Hey, tell our folks your website and where they can read more about your work and this legislation.
Yeah, so if you want to read about my work, you can go to ElijahJStacey.com. You can read about the different things I do. You know, founder of a nonprofit, author, public speaker, different things there. And if you want to read more about this legislation, you can go to Goldwater. They have a lot of information about, you know, the piece of legislation and what it's trying to accomplish.
Excellent. Elijah, thanks so much for coming on, and we wish you and your team success on this legislation.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yep, absolutely. Appreciate that. That's Elijah Stacey and his story behind why this legislation is needed. And it's been passed in multiple states. The original right to try has been passed in nearly 40 states. And the right to try 2.0 has been passed in, I think he said 17 states, and we're continuing to work on that. And the federal version is also being worked on as well. And so this is a very pro-life position. It's a very pro-life priority, and that is to enable people who have been diagnosed with terminal illnesses the ability to expedite experimental treatments to hopefully, in some instances, cure their diseases, or even if it just extends their life or adds to their quality of life. There's a lot of positives that can come out of some of these treatments if only the patients can try them. And so that's what Right to Try 2.0 is about, really getting rid of the regulations in certain instances and allowing patients to go straight to these treatments. Although the treatments are in some instances very experimental, very early, there's still some potential benefits for these patients who have been diagnosed as terminally ill. Well, one topic that President Trump is likely to allude to tonight and address is this topic of NATO. And this is related to what's going on in Iran, although separate in some degree. The NATO, when it comes to cooperating with the U.S., some of these NATO member countries have been very difficult to deal with when it comes to using some of their air bases, in some instances our very own air bases, in their territories and their countries to support this Iran conflict. For example, Spain, along with a few other NATO members, have prevented U.S. military aircraft from landing in their countries en route to the Middle East, en route to the Central Command's area of responsibility. So this is a very big deal. It's very scandalous because obviously NATO has been around for a long time. It's been one of the strongest military alliances in modern history, if not ever. And the U.S. has been a huge funder of NATO and supporter, including the helping Ukraine. Even though Ukraine's not a NATO member country, NATO has been substantially helping Ukraine to the tunes of tens of billions, probably at this point hundreds of billions, in military equipment and cash. So NATO is held together by the U.S., and that's not an overstatement. It has been historically. And we've been there whenever NATO needs us. Obviously, there hasn't been, a major conflict against Russia, former Soviet Union, since NATO was formed, with the exception of the Ukraine situation. But nonetheless, whether it's Ukraine or just the annual defense spending to prop up NATO in the event that NATO articles have to be deployed, and they were in some instances in the Middle East, where we had NATO member countries assisting us, for example, in Afghanistan. We've been there for NATO. That's the point, is we've been there for NATO. We've funded billions of dollars annually to prop up NATO. And all we want to do is use their air bases to land and refuel our aircraft. And they're telling us no go. And so President Trump's very, very angry about this, and he has a right to be, very frustrated that here we are, the U.S., taking care of what everybody knows is the problem child in the region, and that is Iran. And Iran, by the way, is holding up shipping of things like oil, fertilizer, and critical minerals that are trying to go through the Strait of Hormuz into Europe and to NATO member countries. And so the problem is Iran here, and NATO is nowhere to be found. They won't send one ship to the Strait of Hormuz to aid the U.S. in this conflict. And so very frustrating. President Trump has a right to be upset and call for the withdrawal of NATO.
The loss of a child through abortion, miscarriage, or stillbirth affects the emotional health of families. Feelings of anger, sadness, and regret can be overwhelming. There is hope and healing in the aftermath of a reproductive loss. Call the International Helpline at 866-482-LIFE to talk with someone who has been where you are and healed to help others. Your call is confidential. 866-482-LIFE.
As we watch world events unfold and fulfill Scripture, it's hard to believe anyone could doubt God and His Word are real, and yet there are so many who either question or completely refuse to believe it. The God Who Speaks is a 90-minute documentary that hits the doubt head-on with evidence that proves God is real and His Word is the ultimate authority. Watch it anytime and invite others to watch with you. Just visit stream.afa.net. That's stream.afa.net.
The following is a real-life story from Trinity Debt Management.
I had a lot of credit card debt, and it stressed me out. But what I thought was a solution turned out to be a problem. I kept hearing ads about debt settlement that seemed too good to be true. And actually, it was. When I called, they told me to stop paying my bills. That didn't sound right to me at all, so I hung up. Later, I found out that debt settlement is bad. Real bad. Then I learned that there is a right way to pay off your credit cards. It's called a debt management program from the great team at Trinity. Trinity had a plan. In the end, I paid off my bills, I saved thousands, and I even improved my credit score.
If credit card debt has you down, call Trinity at 1-800-788-1813.
My name is Heather. Please forget debt settlement and remember Trinity Debt Management.
1-800-788-1813.
The enemy wants to destroy anything of God's, especially mankind who is made in God's image.
What would it be like if every person knew that they were created in the image of God?
We're talking about people loved by the Father, people for whom Jesus died.
We have to stand on God's truth.
We hear in culture all the time, we need to find ourselves. We need to go find our identity. We are already defined. We are known before the foundations of the world.
In His Image is a life-changing film that has helped people break free from the grip of evil. It will take you through Scripture to show the truth, and its powerful testimonies will destroy Satan's attempts to pervert God's perfect design.
We now know with the genome of all of the DNA that there is no propensity towards a genetic disposition to homosexual behavior.
Watch it for the first time or again with someone who needs to see it. Anytime on AFA Stream. Stream.afa.net.
This is At the Core on American Family Radio with your host, Walker Wildmon.
Welcome back to the program here on American Family Radio for this last segment of today's episode. Glad to have you with us. As a reminder, you can subscribe to the podcast wherever you listen to podcasts, whether it's Spotify, Apple, Android stores, wherever you listen. You can type in At the Core and click the subscribe button, and the latest episode will be queued up in your library each and every day. Well, one of the topics that we're going to talk to our guest with now is the topic of debanking, which sounds bizarre and probably hasn't happened to the majority of you, but definitely has happened to some individuals and organizations. The topic of banks cutting off your account for political reasons or ideological reasons. Brian Knight is with us. Brian is senior counsel over at ADF, Alliance Defending Freedom, and he's with us now to talk about this very topic. Hey, Brian, welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me.
Well, Brian, you and I had a trial run at this last week where we hosted a social media chat basically about this topic, and so you and I are familiar with it and talking through this. But for our listening audience, the word debank, being debanked or debanking, sounds quite bizarre and probably hasn't happened to most just average commercial users. But tell our audience what this is and how this has been used in recent years.
Thank you. Yeah. So for our purposes, when we're talking about debanking, we're talking about a financial institution, a bank, but it could be someone else like your PayPals or your Squares, who either refuses to do business with someone, or if they're already a customer, cuts them off on the grounds of because what the customer is doing is legal, but disfavored by either, that financial institution's management or maybe some other constituency. Sometimes it's a regulator. One of the big examples was in the Obama administration. Banks were pressured to cut ties with certain industries, including payday lenders. And it's not that there was anything illegal, it's that the regulators didn't like payday lending, and, well, if we can cut off their bank access, it'll make it harder for them to do it, and there'll be less of it. More recently, and particularly this became very salient in like 2018 to 2020 or thereabouts, but it's gone on for longer than that. You saw banks cutting off various industries, various individuals, sometimes explicitly on the grounds that, well, look, what you're doing might be legal, but we don't think it's good, and we either want you to not be able to do it or to do less of it. And in some cases, it was more subtle. And we should acknowledge that people lose access to financial services for any number of reasons, some of which are quite legitimate. But in some cases, we saw that banks were quite overt about what they did. They cut off, for example, some of the contractors that served in the first Trump administration to provide detention services for immigration. And the banks, when they cut them off, were explicitly like, well, look, remember, our employees or other constituencies of ours don't think this is the right way to handle immigration. We think this is bad, and so we're going to cut them off. Or fossil fuels. There's been a ton of pressure on banks to cut off oil and gas for environmental reasons. Or firearms. Citibank in 2018 had put out a post basically saying, this is after a terrible school shooting. Oh, well, Congress should pass quote unquote common sense gun control. They don't seem to be doing it, but we're going to try to use our power to force changes, and we think other financial institutions should do the same. That's on sort of the industrial side. But there are also reports of individuals and institutions, including Christian organizations, losing access to financial services. And to the extent that they're given a reason, and in some cases it is explicit, it's something along the lines of, well, your organization is quote unquote hateful. And if you looked at the terms of service that a lot of banks had 2 years ago, they would include, explicitly, oh, you're not allowed to use this service for anything hateful or bigoted. And as we know, those terms they're very vague.
Yeah.
They're in the eye of the beholder, and they have been weaponized to try to suppress perfectly constitutional, perfectly legal, perfectly nonviolent speech that is just disfavored by progressives.
Yeah.
Or some progressives, I should say. And so that's the sort of the issue of debanking that we're talking about, is where these financial institutions try to de facto regulate the rest of us by controlling access to financial services, because without financial services, it's pretty difficult to function in the modern world, especially at any scale.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, cash obviously is going to the wayside. It's more and more difficult to use cash. And so the having an online bank and having a piece of plastic card is nearly essential. I mean, for daily life, it's practically essential for daily life in 2026. And so this is not something where, you just go down the street and you can shop somewhere else. This is a big deal. And the American Family Association's been debanked on at least 2 occasions. The first occasion was with the Stripe payment platform, and you alluded to these kind of these third-party platforms that they're not FDIC regulated per se, but they're a core function of the payment processing system or the ecosystem, the financial ecosystem. Stripe Payments platform is a multi-billion-dollar payment processor. And so we were using Stripe on our website to process donations from everyone who donated online to AFA, and they cut us off overnight. It gave us like a 24-hour notice, and we were cut off. So we had to move everything over, and it took us a couple weeks to get it cleaned up. And that was Stripe, and I can go talk for an hour about that. And then we've also been debanked by Capital One, which is owned by JP Morgan Chase at this point, and is actually under the heading of a bank. So both of those have debanked American Family Association. You guys have other examples you've worked with that you're aware of with other clients. President Trump's organization, the Trump Organization, was cut off by Capital One in 2021 after January 6th. Over 100 accounts were cut off. That's being litigated in the civil side at this point. So my point in kind of dragging this on is that it is an issue. This isn't a hypothetical, or it may happen down the road. This is actually happening in real time. What can be done about it? Obviously, there's the federal side and the state side. Congress obviously doesn't have a good track record of getting stuff done. So the states are really the most likely place to address this, at least in the short term. So what can states do?
Yeah, so states can pass what are called fair access laws. And in effect, they're an anti-discrimination law that says, there are several different flavors of these floating around, but the one that we at ADF have worked on says that, in effect, look, you can't deny someone services or cancel their account. I should say it applies to, our version applies only to the largest institutions, $100 billion in assets, or for a payments firm, $100 billion in throughput on a yearly basis. But it says you can't discriminate against someone on the basis of their constitutionally protected speech, constitutionally protected exercise of religion, or lawful industry. And what that doesn't mean that a bank has to serve everybody as if it's a public utility. There are any number of completely legitimate reasons why a bank wouldn't serve somebody, including, with some nuance, profit maximization. But what it does say is, in effect, you cannot say, well, look, we think your speech it's legal, but we think it's hateful, and so we will deny you services. And it also means that if another constituency of that institution comes and says, look, if you want my business, you have to cut off AFA. I think AFA is terrible, and so if you want my business, you have to cut off AFA. This law would say, sorry, we can't do that. It's against the law. But it would also say, neither can our competitors. And so that helps relieve the pressure on the financial institution to resist that type of pressure. It also mandates that the financial institution, if it is going to cut off someone's account, provide them with an explanation as to why. And there's precedent for this. Under federal law, the Equal Credit Opportunity Act, if you get denied a credit card, or if they deny you a loan, or if something else adverse happens as part of a credit transaction, they are supposed to provide you, the financial institution is supposed to provide you with a notification as to why, and it's supposed to be at least somewhat specific. But for a lot of other financial services, including deposit accounts, payment services, et cetera, there's no federal obligation to provide an explanation, and there's no federal protection against religious discrimination. It really is just kind of on the credit side and the mortgage side. So states can pass these laws, and the states have broad authority to pass this type of law, and it can bind not only state banks, but it can bind national banks, so long as the law does not discriminate against national banks and treat them differently. So long as it treats them the same as everyone else, the law can bind them. And so we think that's probably the best thing that a state can do to provide people with protection.
Yeah, this is going to become more necessary as the years go by. I mean, obviously it's needed now based on the context we've set here. But the more digital we go, which you think to yourself, how could we go more digital? Well, it's happening. And the ability to use cash is becoming more and more difficult. The more digital we go, and I know there's been talk about central bank digital currency. I think it's a bad idea, but nonetheless, clearly things are moving more digital. Eventually, things will be virtually all digital. This is going to become more and more necessary because your options or your plan Bs are just not going to be there. Either you bank using a plastic debit card or online with money transfers, etc., or you just don't operate. I mean, you don't pay your bills, you don't pay your mortgage, etc. So people, this is a necessity for daily life, and the more things go digital, the more this is going to become necessary. Brian, thanks so much for coming on the program. Tell our folks, you guys' website, how they can check out more about your work.
adflegal.org.
And there you go, adflegal.org. Brian Knight, Senior Counsel there at ADF. Brian, thanks again for coming on the program.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. That's Brian Knight, Senior Counsel, ADF. adflegal.org is that URL, adflegal.org. Not only is ADF in the courtroom litigating, but they're also helping draft legislation to address some of the most critical issues of the day. And the topic we were talking about now is debanking, which is a big, big issue. The American Family Association has been debanked on multiple occasions. President Trump has been debanked on multiple occasions as well. And there's other examples. Former Ambassador Sam Brownback, also former governor, he was debanked. And the language that they used against us was basically they called our operation high risk or risky, and which really obviously is vague. But they won't go as far to say, basically, we don't like AFA and what you guys do, so we're going to cut you off. They'll cite terms of use, which I love when they cite terms of use, and the terms of use are 20 pages long. And so you say, well, okay, terms of use, can you give me specifics, please? And they don't. They don't give you specifics. Or they'll call your operation, quote, risky, high risk, which they would claim puts them at legal jeopardy or legal risk for continuing to support your organization. Folks, do you hear how this is going here? Calling a Christian nonprofit organization operation and, quote, risky for a for-profit company to support, to partner with. But this is the strategy of the left. And you notice we don't do this. The right doesn't do this. Now, we'll boycott. We'll say, hey, you shouldn't shop at Target because they're letting men in girls' bathrooms. But there's nobody on the right suggesting that the ACLU or the Human Rights Campaign ought to have their bank accounts cut off. I mean, this is just insane. This is insanity. The pushing for the inability for an organization or an individual to be able to operate in daily American life is so wrong, so unpatriotic, and there's nothing illegal being done here. This is saying, I don't like your speech, I don't like your viewpoints, I don't like your belief system. Thus, you should be de facto canceled from American society. That's the end effect here. This is way beyond a boycott. You talk about upping the ante. This is way beyond a boycott, or you shouldn't support them, or whatever you want to say, fill in the blank. When you take away the ability to bank, you are de facto taking away the ability to operate in American society in the 21st century. While debanking might not rise to the level of a public utility, it sure is close, and it ought to be regulated in a very similar manner. Thanks so much for joining us. Be sure to check out the podcast over at afr.net. We'll see you next time.